when a liberal TV host tried to ambush Donald Trump with questions about his marriage on live television, she had no idea it would turn into the biggest mistake of her career. Donald Trump was initially shocked when he heard the rumors about what the upcoming primetime interview would entail, yet he resolved to face it head on, despite the many warnings from advisors who claimed the host had spent weeks preparing the perfect ambush. Major network millions watching live the host was infamous for her gotcha moments with conservative guests, and tonight she thought she had the perfect trap. Said her team had spent weeks crafting questions designed to humiliate Trump and attack his family values. But she had no idea what was coming as the cameras started rolling. Trump sat calmly in his chair while the host wore that signature fake smile of hers. Over the years, he had grown accustomed to tough questions, skeptical journalists, and endless speculation about his personal life. But something about the whispered hints of how deeply the host planned to pry into his marriage left him feeling both uneasy and determined to set the record straight in front of millions watching at home. From the moment he arrived at the bustling television studio, he sensed the tension in the air, picking up on the hushed conversations among the crew who carefully avoided his gaze. He could practically feel the producers congratulating themselves on how they had arranged the lighting and camera angles in such a way as to capture every flicker of emotion on his face. And the knowledge that he was stepping into a carefully laid trap gave him a jolt of adrenaline. Still, he entered the green room with his trademark composure and even signed autographs for a small group of fans who had gathered near the backstage entrance. The host, well known for her so-called gotcha interviews, had a reputation for using a carefully rehearsed mixture of charm and pointed insinuations, a formula that had reduced more than a few conservative guests to silence, frustration, or awkward fumbling. That evening, her show opened with an energetic monologue that teased the audience with the promise of major fireworks, hinting that Trump would finally face the kind of personal questions he supposedly dreaded. Yet, as he sat down in the interview chair under the piercing glare of overhead lights, he reminded himself that he had survived countless attacks before, from political rivals to sensationalist media personalities. Although a sliver of shock remained, he truly was not sure how low the host might go. He also carried a sense of readiness. Cameras rolled. The host introduced him with a practiced smile that felt more predatory than welcoming. And then she fired her first question, which touched casually on whether he considered himself lucky to have achieved fame, wealth, and even a stint in the White House. Although that question sounded simple, Trump recognized the subtext. Using words like luck could undercut the years of labor and risk he had taken in business, and he responded firmly that luck alone had never built skyscrapers nor maintained massive companies. He went on to say that if anything, luck might open a door, but persistence, intelligence, and hard work keep you in the room. The host's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment, her smile gave way to a more calculating expression, as if she realized that her opening gambit had failed to unsettle him. She tried again, feigning warmth by asking how much of his success he credited to the people around him, a question that opened the door for him to speak about his family. He answered naturally, explaining that no one accomplishes great things by themselves, and that his family, including Melania, had played a vital role in providing support. Observers backstage later said they could practically see the delight flicker across the host's face when he mentioned Melania, as if she had found the very crack she needed. She began a slow pivot toward the real heart of her ambush, making light references to Melania's background and public persona. The audience mostly listened politely, not quite anticipating the twist that was coming. In measured tones, the host pressed on, maintaining her artificially sweet smile as she suggested Melania rarely spoke out, leaving many to wonder if she might be overshadowed by Trump's larger-than-life personality. Trump answered that Melania chose her moments, preferring dignity over constant public showmanship, and that she engaged in meaningful projects when she felt they could have a real impact, a stark contrast to some who chase any camera they can find. The tension rose, fed by the sense that the host was not getting the answers she wanted. She tightened her smile and, after a brief pause, tossed out a condescending remark about how some people believed Melania's greatest feat was simply being Mrs. Donald Trump. In the first serious ripple of disapproval from the studio audience, a few people murmured and some eyebrows shot up. Trump's posture changed slightly, leaning forward as though bracing for what he suspected would be a more invasive line of questioning. Calmly, he pointed out that Melania had a successful modeling career prior to their marriage, that she spoke multiple languages fluently, and that she had used her platform as First Lady to advocate for numerous initiatives. He added that the media largely ignored her achievements, preferring to focus on trivial details, like her wardrobe choices. The audience, warming to his defense of his wife, applauded politely, but the host would not be deterred. She pressed him again, claiming the public deserved to know more, and hinting that much of Melania's perceived success might be due to Trump's wealth and the doors it opened. Trump allowed a small chuckle to escape, and he responded that the media had a habit of dismissing conservative women as mere accessories rather than recognizing their substance. The applause grew louder, and frustration was visible on the host's face. She paused, searching her note cards for the perfect pivot, then bared her claws by asking about the pressures placed on a marriage when one partner is always in the spotlight. That question quickly veered into insinuations that surely a man of Trump's status might feel tempted to find a newer model wife eventually, an outright reference to trading up that caused an audible collective gasp in the studio. Trump sat silent for a split second, shock etched into the lines around his eyes, and the host might have believed for that tiny moment that she had him cornered, that he would lash out angrily or be forced into an awkward dodge. Instead, when he did speak, his voice was steady yet quietly outraged. He repeated her phrase, trading up, and explained that such a concept might apply in the context of real estate or cars, but not in a partnership where loyalty, mutual respect, and shared experiences shaped a bond far deeper than superficial appearances. A hush descended over the room as the realization spread that the host had ventured into territory that many found deeply disrespectful. Trump methodically made his points, describing how he and Melania had weathered difficult times together, how she had stood beside him when the cameras were off, how real relationships are built on intangible qualities like honesty and devotion, the kind that are not for sale and certainly not replaceable. The crowd clapped, at first hesitant, then more fervently, and in that moment, the host's plan began visibly unraveling. She tried to salvage control, insisting her question was purely hypothetical, but the damage was already done. The audience saw how her words had overstepped any acceptable boundary of respectful inquiry. Trump moved in for the rhetorical kill, pointing out how the media pretends to champion female empowerment, yet often demeans conservative women by reducing them to trophy wives or silent figures. He said that genuine empowerment recognizes a woman's accomplishments and contributions without tainting them with cynicism. At that line, the clapping was almost thunderous. Seizing upon the momentum, Trump further criticized the practice of using personal relationships as a weapon for shock value in interviews, arguing that millions of viewers across America share his perspective that a marriage should be off-limits for cheap shots. Every time the host tried to interrupt or steer the conversation back to less emotionally charged topics, the applause would surge again. The producer, seeing the interview spiral into a moment that would likely become infamous, frantically signaled for a commercial break. But either the director missed the cue or recognized that cutting away would look equally bad. The host labored to regain her composure, flipping through her note cards. But each pivot led Trump to deliver yet another reproach of sensational journalism and the modern media's obsession with scandal over substance. He challenged her to explain how a question about trading up contributed to a genuine understanding of his policies, his character, or even Melania's real passions and humanitarian efforts. She could not come up with a convincing response, stammering that she merely wanted to understand how Melania handled the extraordinary pressures. Trump, in reply, said such a question could have been asked in a respectful manner, absent the insulting suggestion that she was disposable. The audience showed its support once more with cheering and applause, and the host's face took on a tense, almost panicked look. By the time the show finally managed to cut to a commercial break, audience members were on their feet, many wearing expressions of outrage over the disrespectful line of questioning. During that brief break, staffers raced around in a scramble, the producer reportedly berating the host in hushed tones for pushing the envelope too far. But the damage had been done. After the show resumed, the host tried to pivot to broader topics like the economy and foreign policy. But the atmosphere had radically changed. The once eager crowd no longer trusted her impartiality, and the entire segment felt stiff. Trump, however, maintained a calm and commanding demeanor, returning to policy points with practiced ease. Viewers at home took to social media, and within minutes, clips of the shocking exchange flooded every platform, sparking immediate debate about whether the host had crossed a moral line in her questions. Backstage, multiple staffers whispered to each other that this was likely to become one of the most viewed and dissected interviews in the show's history, but not for the reasons the host originally intended. Once the cameras stopped rolling, Trump left the stage, accompanied by his team. Witness accounts say he looked neither triumphant nor vindictive, just resolved in his belief that the media thrived on negativity and had once again overreached. The host, meanwhile, retreated away from onlookers, her face pale. Some claimed she muttered something about how everything had gone off the rails. Indeed, by the next morning, a whirlwind of reactions emerged. Conservative media hailed Trump's passionate defense of his wife, praising him for undercutting a degrading question. Even moderate or independent voices who typically disagreed with Trump's politics admitted that the host's approach came off as cheap tabloid fodder rather than tough but fair journalism. Though plenty of critics still found fault with Trump's overall style and policies, they acknowledged that his argument about loyalty in marriage resonated with many Americans who value commitment and respect. The host's network tried to control the narrative by framing the question as a mere attempt to explore the strains of political life on a high-profile marriage. But few people accepted that explanation. Many viewers felt that a more delicate or respectful question could have addressed the pressures of public scrutiny without implying that Melania might be cast aside like an old car. It did not help that, as the video clips spread, they fueled a wave of backlash against the host's sensational style, prompting intense discussions about how far is too far when it comes to personal interviews. Some watchers argued that any political figure's marriage is fair game if it reveals character or hypocrisy, but far more insisted that the phrasing was a blatant insult to both Trump and Melania, crossing into territory that even the more combative corners of the media do not typically breach. Still others saw it as emblematic of a broader pattern in which conservative women are disparaged by outlets claiming to champion women's rights. Over subsequent days, online commentary rarely let up, dissecting every angle. Pundits on talk radio and cable news devoted entire segments to replaying the host's question and Trump's response, analyzing his body language, and her increasingly desperate attempts to regain control. People who had never supported Trump found themselves agreeing that the question's callousness overshadowed any meaningful conversation that could have taken place. Meanwhile, his supporters seized the moment to reinforce the narrative that the media had a vendetta and that the gotcha culture was fueling division rather than an honest exploration of ideas. The host herself went quiet on social media for a brief period, presumably facing a storm of both criticism and defensive applause from some of her own fans, who cheered her for trying to take Trump down a peg. She only addressed the incident obliquely on her next show, issuing a brief statement about having strong questions and not backing away from the tough subjects. But that statement drew further ridicule from those who felt she was conflating a legitimate inquiry into marital pressure with a demeaning suggestion about discarding one's spouse. Regardless of her motives, the spectacle now lived on in the national consciousness, providing a cautionary tale for interviewers who might be tempted to rely on shock value to score cheap points. Numerous columnists, bloggers, and experts in media ethics weighed in, some framing the event as a referendum on the way cable news has turned into a theater of personal drama. Students in journalism schools even use this moment as a case study for how an interviewer's tone and wording can drastically shape the moral and emotional dynamics of a conversation. Far from the triumph the network had likely hoped for, the interview became a textbook example of how a so-called ambush can collapse in on itself, damaging the ambusher's reputation instead of the intended target. Trump, for his part, gave a few remarks in subsequent days, reiterating that he believed in loyalty, that his marriage was off limits for cheap barbs, and that the media needed to rediscover respect if it wanted to regain public trust. The simplicity and consistency of his message seemed to resonate, especially with viewers tired of relentless, negative coverage. As the wave of commentary rolled on, it became clear that no amount of damage control from the host or the network could erase the impression she had left. A question about trading up was now embedded in a broader conversation about the direction of journalism itself, overshadowing any policy or political angles. Interestingly enough, the spotlight also led more people to read about Melania's philanthropic efforts, her Be Best campaign, and even her personal history, as if they were spurred by the sense that she had been unfairly reduced to a caricature in that interview. In that sense, the very attack that had attempted to diminish her role ultimately inspired some viewers to learn more about her genuine projects. As for the host, she found herself walking a tightrope in her next few high-profile interviews, trying to avoid the same pitfalls. Audiences watched closely to see if she would once again cross a personal line with any guest. Panel discussions on rival networks hammered home the point that the entire fiasco might have been avoided with a more nuanced or respectful approach to the personal dimension of Trump's marriage. Some media figures, while typically critical of Trump, admitted that using a marriage as a sensational target erodes the integrity of what should be a serious platform for accountability and truth. Regardless of what side one took, it was impossible to deny that the question about trading up had shattered all semblance of professional decorum and turned a critical mass of viewers against the host's brand of journalism. Weeks later, the clip continued to circulate online, reigniting fresh commentary each time it appeared. Supporters of Trump lauded him for refusing to let the moment pass, praising his defense of Melania as not just a defense of one relationship, but also of family values in general. Critics of Trump sometimes bemoaned that the host had carelessly handed him a public relations victory. Even some of those who harbored no fondness for Trump personally conceded that any spouse, regardless of politics, deserved more respect than the host had shown. Through it all, Trump remained steadfast in interviews, referencing the ambush as a prime example of why he believed mainstream media had lost its way. He argued that journalism was supposed to investigate matters of public concern, but a pointed jab at his marriage did little to inform people about genuine issues. Meanwhile, Melania herself appeared composed in public events, offering no public statement on the fiasco, though sources close to her said she appreciated that many recognized the insult for what it was. In some ways, the incident became less about Donald Trump personally and more about a societal debate. To what extent does the media have the right to pry into someone's private relationships? And where do we draw the line between fair questioning and outright disrespect? The fact that so many people reacted strongly indicated that the question of trading up touched a raw nerve, calling into focus how heavily some corners of entertainment-based media rely on shock to drive ratings. Inevitably, the conversation also turned to whether a similar question would have been posed to a liberal figure, or if it was specifically crafted to demean a conservative. The host's defenders argued that uncomfortable queries are a hallmark of good journalism, but they struggled to answer why it had to be phrased in such a belittling way. Ultimately, what emerged from the entire debacle was a profound reminder that personal matters, especially marriage, can be an emotional minefield, and that the American viewing public is not as tolerant of flippant disrespect as some producers might assume. The moment had backfired so spectacularly because it had exposed a deeper cultural value. Many believe in the sanctity of a committed relationship and see it as something to be honored, not reduced to material worth. For all his polarizing qualities, Trump managed to harness that sentiment, turning the tables on the host and reframing the question as an indictment of shallow media values. After the dust settled, the interview remained a stark warning for all who rely on gotcha tactics to try and corner a public figure. It reminded them that sometimes targeting a personal bond as deep as marriage might unite viewers in sympathy for the attacked party, no matter how divisive that figure typically is. Ultimately, Trump's initial shock at discovering the host's strategy evolved into an unwavering performance that not only shielded Melania from the worst insinuations, but also placed the media itself under the microscope. Though many subsequent interviews attempted their own angle on the subject, few could replicate the raw, dramatic tension that night produced. And in the end, it was Trump who walked away with the lasting moral victory, defending his wife on national television and exposing the dark side of media sensationalism for millions to see, ensuring that this interview would be remembered less for any policy revelations and more for a single crass suggestion that backfired in front of the entire nation.